Hey everybody, it's John from the Hustle Daily Show. Before we get into the show today, did you know that HubSpot launched an AI chatbot that helps you build awesome campaigns at scale with just a few prompts? It's called Campaign Assistant, and it's a totally free-to-use AI tool made for marketers and business leaders who spend hours a day on content creation. Campaign Assistant will transform the way that you build marketing campaigns at scale. Craft personalized emails, ads, and landing pages in just a matter of minutes. Just pick the content type, add the key selling points, and let the AI take it from there. And the best part, it works seamlessly with all of HubSpot's marketing and sales tools to scale your output across email, social, and more. So AI your way into the most effective campaigns yet at HubSpot.com/campaign-assistant.
All right, what's going on, everyone? It's Wednesday, March 2nd, and you are listening to The Hustle Daily Show. I'm Zachary Crockett. I'm here with our daily writer, Rob Litterst.
What's up, Zach?
And we've also got our trends director, Steph Smith, back in the show.
Always good to be here, guys.
So today we are talking about garage doors. You may not think about them very much, but they're the latest big shortage holding up the housing market. We're also going to go deep on Zoom. They just came out with their latest earnings report, and it's not all good news. So Steph's going to enlighten us on how the company might keep whatever is remaining of its pandemic momentum alive. But before we get into that, let's do a quick breakdown of the news. Western businesses are severing ties with Russia to comply with economic sanctions. General Motors indefinitely suspended vehicle exports to Russia. The German manufacturer Daimler Truck is also cutting off its supply of civilian truck components. But the biggest moves so far have been made in the energy sector. Shell and BP are both ditching decades-long relationships with pipelines in Russia that are said to be worth tens of billions of dollars in business. On the topic of Russia, a few weeks ago, a teenager made international headlines for setting up a bot that tracks Elon Musk's private jet. He even had a little interaction with Musk through his Twitter DMs, and the Tesla chief offered to pay him $5,000 to take that account down. Well, he's shifted his attention to a new project called Russian Oligarch Jets. Jack Sweeney, that's the kid's name, he's now tracking helicopters, private jets, and commercial airliners associated with prominent Russian billionaires who are scrambling to move and protect their assets in the wake of economic turmoil. And now for something completely different, Coors Light is finally ditching those terrible plastic rings that hold together their six-packs of beer. In recent decades, these rings have become public enemy number one among environmental conservationists. They get stuck on birds' necks, they kill turtles and fish, and they pollute the ocean. So Molson Coors is looking to phase them out by 2025 and move toward sustainably sourced cardboard wrap carriers. They say that the move is going to cost them around $85 million in new machinery, but ultimately it's going to eliminate 1.7 million pounds of plastic per year. That's going to do it for the news today, and let's get into today's big stories. So, Rob, before we really dig into garage doors here, you have a little story of your own to tell us, right?
Yeah, so I'm glad that we're airing out one of my most embarrassing moments in front of all of our podcast listeners. Yeah, so I think it was a couple days after Christmas, or maybe right before Christmas, but right around the Christmas break, I was rushing to a birthday party for my sister-in-law. And basically I had the car seat with my son. So I didn't click the garage door button when I walked out to the garage. And you'll see why that's important later. After buckling my son into the car and starting the car, I clicked the garage door opener that we have inside our car. And I looked in the media console that kind of shows like the reverse camera looking backwards, and it looked totally fine. But what I didn't actually factor in is that the camera on our back bumper only goes up to a certain height. And so I started backing out and basically backed out way faster than I usually would and clipped the bottom panel of our garage door.
Uh-oh.
And immediately felt this just horrible sense of dread and like I did something terrible. Anyway, so I immediately called a local repair shop. I had a guy basically come out and give me an estimate, and the estimate was for one panel. So if you ever look at a garage door, it's usually made up of 4 panels, I think, but I basically hit just the bottom panel. I could still close it manually, but it was kind of dented in a way that made it so that you could kind of see air inside our garage on both sides. So I brought this guy out. He said that it would cost about $1,000 for a single panel and that it would take about 2 to 3 months for the panel to get there.
Months.
2 to 3 months. And this was in December. So it's cold where I live in December. I live outside Boston. And so I'm just thinking this isn't going to be good for our energy bills. There could be critters that are getting into our garage. Like we have our trash and our compost out in my garage. So I'm already freaking out about this. And then I get back inside and I check my email and the guy sent me a quote. I was expecting $1,000, which is what he said. It actually was a quote for $2,500 with a 3 to 4 month lead time. And so I called him immediately and was like, what's going on here? And basically what happened is they couldn't get a single panel. So he told me that I would need to get an entirely new garage door and it would take obviously almost double the time and be more than double the cost of the single panel. Needless to say, I wanted to look and see what else was out there. So I looked at the brand for our garage door and I looked for authorized dealers online. I found one that was within like 15 miles away. I called them. Long story short, they gave me a quote for $650 for one panel and a lead time of about a month. And so they're an authorized dealer and it still took them about a month to get a single panel for this garage door, which, I mean, it kind of tells you the extent of how long these delays can get. But ultimately they met that timeline, got it done, and it was still a $650 dent that did not have to happen. Definitely one of my more embarrassing moments.
Yeah.
But one thing that's funny, real quick, is I called and I think the guy could sense it in my tone, how embarrassed I was about backing into my garage door. Cause this guy like immediately as I was talking to him was like, hey, you got to realize like a lot of people do this. We do like 4 or 5 of these repairs in your town per day. So like, don't think that you're alone here. that
right.
Definitely made me feel a little bit better.
So like people backing into garage doors is one thing, but we're obviously building a lot of new housing units right now across America. People need these garage doors, but Rob, you did a little digging on this and you are not alone here. Garage doors are a big problem right now. What's going on?
They're a huge problem. Yeah, so there are 2 kind of macro factors that are influencing the issue with garage doors. And the prices for garage doors right now are up like 2 to 3 times what they were last year, and they're becoming harder and harder to find. The first macro factor is the housing market. Record prices are basically pushing folks out of cities and further into the suburbs where you need a car and where the need for a garage increases. And to put a number behind that, in 2020, 90% of new homes being built had a garage. So most homes being built have a garage. It's pretty unlikely that you're going to build one without one. And the second part of it is the supply chain crisis. So garage doors are kind of a sneaky, tricky gadget and component of a home. They have a lot of different kind of parts that need to be configured. Some of the things that go into garage doors that are in short supply right now include spray foam insulation, polyurethane, and steel. Those things are obviously just making it a lot harder for people to actually get garage doors.
So what's the big picture here? Like, how is this shortage affecting the housing market right now?
Yeah, so the impact is pretty crazy. One builder in this article that we read from the New York Times, which gives a great profile of this entire problem, said that it used to take 20 weeks to build a house, and now it takes 20 weeks just to get a pair of garage doors, which just sounds absolutely insane. The big issue here too is builders typically can't pass inspections on new homes without garage doors. It's considered a part of the house that needs to be done for them to actually pass inspection. And so it's delaying closings big time. So these builders can't actually pass the keys off to homeowners until they get inspected most of the time. And that's obviously a big part of what's causing this delay.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen just from like browsing on Zillow, like you see new houses being built with just like a giant piece of plywood blocking the garage door. So are they like not legally allowed to sell a house like that?
Yeah, so most places are not. And so what's interesting is Sacramento passed this provision. Essentially, a bunch of builders went to the town of Sacramento to see if they could essentially waive the fact that a garage door needs to be in a home for it to be sellable. And they made this exception and passed this provision where builders can essentially put plywood in place of the garage door. for a temporary amount of time, right? For a temporary period until they get the actual garage door. And other builders are just using cheap replacement doors that they can get their hands on until the permanent doors are delivered. So it's definitely causing some homeowners to be pretty resourceful and creative to try to figure this out. But in the long run, it's definitely pushing that timeline for builders just way out, way past what it normally would be.
Good time to be in garage door sales. Probably not such a good time to be an employee at Zoom. Steph, you dug into Zoom's earning report a little bit and just the broader nature of their business model right now. What'd you find out?
Yeah, so as a lot of people know, the stock market has been having a crazy ride throughout 2022, and it's impacted not all stocks alike. A lot of what people call the growth stocks or even the pandemic darlings have seen a pretty significant downfall from their highs. And Zoom is one of those darlings that we all saw skyrocket throughout the pandemic. They hit a share price of, I think, $559. And as of today, as we're recording this, fell back down to $125. So they've lost over 3/4 of their value. Now, I should say their earnings report was actually good in the sense that they beat their earnings and they have been growing across their different business units. But the question is, can they continue growing at the swift pace that they've been growing, or was the pandemic just a transient thing that companies like Zoom were experiencing? So I think that's an interesting question to consider, whether we expect these companies to continue thriving in this digital age, or was it something that, we're all kind of doing during the pandemic and we're not going to be involved in as much moving forward?
So I should correct myself there. It's not all doom and gloom from the earnings report.
Not Zoom doom, but
yeah, not Zoom doom
it is
yet.
something that, one question that I would pose to you guys is, do you think that we're still going to be using Zoom in 10 years, the same way that we're using it today? And if the answer is no, what do you think we'll be using? Will we be back to in-person meetings? Will we be using a completely new tool? Will we be in Oculus headsets?
I think we're all going to go back to AIM Messenger eventually. We're going to come full circle. But you're right. I mean, these technologies are sometimes transient or they lead to other things. Zoom has been a lifesaver during the pandemic for personal interaction. It's the only way I get to see both of you. We live in different places and we're all over the place now. And, our office is now in Austin. So I feel like it's probably like anyone else. I have a love-hate relationship with it. I usually keep my camera turned off these days. Yeah. I've just kind of slowly watched myself age over the last 2 years in reflection of my own computer screen.
Well, I mean, it is really abnormal to be looking at your own face 24/7. I mean, imagine the in-person equivalent if you were in a boardroom and there was a mirror right in front of your face throughout that entire meeting. And imagine doing that all day, every day for years. It is unnatural. And so I think there's going to be certain habits that will change. But I guess as a company, it's interesting to consider Zoom has focused primarily on these business meetings and facilitating that need for people. But they also have been picked up as podcast recording software for online events, and, I'm sure many other use cases that I can't even think of right now. And so it'll be interesting to see how they progress, if they continue to focus on business meetings or seeing how their software can be used for other purposes like online education.
Yeah, but Steph, to your previous question, I think what Zoom did really, really well in the video space is they made their platform so easy and frictionless to use. The key players in video before Zoom, I think, were Cisco WebEx, GoToMeeting, and maybe a few others. And they were decent platforms, but they were...
Skype.
Yeah, Skype, exactly.
We were using Skype back in the day.
Exactly. But they were kind of clunky. I guess Skype wasn't clunky, but I think Microsoft and Skype in general had kind of like a confusing approach to approaching the enterprise with video conferencing and didn't really pursue that super hard in the beginning. But the other ones were, and I think for somebody to supplant Zoom, it would just have to be a really easy to use and frictionless application. And I wonder if that's coming in video. I wonder if it's coming in audio or, just allowing people to kind of patch quickly into audio meetings. I could totally see it being going back to the office, especially seeing there being some novelty there with the pandemic ending and people wanting to actually interact with people face to face. But I'm skeptical of VR. I feel like it's kind of a heavy lift to get people to put on headsets, especially in the course of work. But yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch.
And Steph, you've touched on this in the past, but the video conferencing space is kind of splitting up across sectors, right? Like in the podcast recording world, we have Riverside or Zencaster. For online events, we have Remo or AirMeet, for instance. What do you think it is that is going to truly distinguish Zoom and keep them afloat, so to speak?
That's a great question because you are seeing this unbundling of Zoom because Zoom is this giant that can't focus on all these things. It can't provide the perfect online event experience. It can't provide the perfect experience for teachers and students. And so Zoom is kind of this bloated thing, which it didn't used to be. People used to know Zoom as, Rob said, the easiest way to meet online. It was just so quick, and their technology still, I think to this day, is the fastest and has the least latency. But the question is that enough, right? Can people experience a little latency for a more curated experience? I think maybe yes. And I think Zoom today is the Kleenex of the space. Everyone even uses the term Zoom, the verb, to meet with someone. But I do question whether they're going to be able to keep up in all of these more niche spaces, or they're not even niche. Something like online education is massive, but whether they're going to be able to keep up across the board. It seems like so far what Zoom has been focused on throughout the pandemic is the enterprise and those business meetings. So we'll see if that is the right move for them or whether they really should be focusing elsewhere. I will say one thing that I think they should be doing more of regardless is integrations. Right now, most companies, if they wanted to switch from Zoom to even something like a Google Meet, you could do that tomorrow. Your whole company could transition the next day with the exception of compliance. If you have integrations, like, it integrates into Spotify so we can play our favorite songs at the beginning of a meeting, or I can buy my team gifts so that they arrive at their door and they have free lunch at the beginning of a call. I think some integrations like that, which smaller parties could not create as effectively, would be what would keep those people locked into Zoom in ways that would be sustainable.
That's such a good point, Steph. Like, people don't think about that a ton with video conferencing, but it's not a sticky software product. We have FaceTime on our phones, like something like HubSpot where you have, a CRM, not to toot our own horns here, but CRMs are incredibly sticky products, right? You have all of your customers, all of your prospects, all of this information indexed, and it's super important for your business. It's going to be really hard to convince somebody to leave all of that and go elsewhere. With Zoom, there really isn't a sense of loss aversion because you could jump into Google Meet, like you said, you could jump somewhere else like the next day and it wouldn't really matter. And I mean, there was a course of a few years where my companies jumped from GoToMeeting to WebEx to
There's tons.
Uber. Yeah, Blue Jeans. It's totally frictionless to jump from one to the other because it just doesn't matter.
Exactly. And imagine if you're a salesperson and you're choosing between these softwares. Right now, they're mostly identical. But if Zoom had the optionality to, during a sales call, send someone something, or to, during an online event, have their own incorporated trivia software, that's when you would feel sticky with the software and you wouldn't be able to just spin up a Google Meet because it wouldn't actually service your needs.
Totally. That's actually, and this is kind of putting you on the spot, Steph, but is there one integration that you think would be just so fundamental for Zoom and such a game changer? Because I have one in mind. I'm curious if you've got any.
Oh, I don't know if I have one. I did tweet about this a while ago. I said Spotify to play intro meeting music, Slido for in-app Q&A and trivia, this tool called Lupintai to easily send gifts to people, HR platforms so that you can easily highlight people's birthdays. Like, imagine we all hopped on a call and Zoom itself was like, happy birthday, Zach. And then Jiffy so that you can send GIFs in the chat. That one's kind of silly, but I
love it.
I'm surprised that doesn't exist yet.
Love that. So mine, they already do have an integration with it, but it's Slack. Like, I think like Slack and Zoom, the more tightly they can work together, the better. Is kind of like the anti-Teams alliance. Like, Teams has had such a stifling effect on the growth of both of those companies, I feel like, because so many companies use Microsoft. And like, my wife works at TJX and they use Teams. She's literally never used Zoom except for personal things. Like, she's never had to use Zoom for work because they always use Teams. She's never used Slack because she uses Teams. Microsoft really kind of hit the ball out of the park there by giving it away, which I think some people think that it's kind of unfair that they did that, but that'd be my bet. I think yours are a lot more fun though, Steph.
I also think they could get more creative with the features within their platform. So one that I think that should exist is where you can see how much airtime each participant had, either live or after the call. So you can see who is not really getting their fair share, who maybe you should call on more. I think you could get a little more direct with some of the features. You could have a feature where you can see how late people are to calls. Maybe you even detect their pay. I know most workplaces wouldn't do that, but that would sure get people to show up on time. I think they could just probably have a product manager who's focused on maybe less the core business objectives of Zoom and more of these quirky features that people would talk about, but also would differentiate them from the Google Meets or the other players in the space.
Speaking time is a fantastic idea.
Definitely.
A nice tie-in with like diversity initiatives, things like that.
If we use Zoom for these podcasts, it's like, Rob, you need to shut the up. It's getting ridiculous.
No, I mean, the one I said about being late to meetings, I was like, that should exist, but I would definitely get docked for that.
All right. Well, on the note of shutting the up, that's going to do it for us today, folks. Thanks for listening to the Hustle Daily Show. We're a proud part of the HubSpot Podcast Network. I'm Zachary Crockett. Big thanks to Rob and Steph for joining me today. And shout out to our producer, Darren Clark, who makes the show tick. If you liked what you heard today, we've got a lot more tech and business coverage over at thehustle.co. So head over and give us a whirl. That's thehustle.co. We'll catch you all tomorrow.
Hey guys, if you listen to the Hustle Daily Show on Google Podcasts, we want to let you know that the option will no longer be available pretty soon. Google is sunsetting its podcast app sometime in early 2024 in favor of YouTube Music, and we want to give you a heads up before it's too late since that time's almost here. The Hustle Daily Show is available everywhere and anywhere that you listen to podcasts like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you're using YouTube Music, we are there as well. If you're an Android fan, there are plenty of apps like Overcast, Pocket Casts, Player FM, and more. So just search for us wherever you decide to listen to your favorite podcasts.